I'm a 15-year-old girl from Nebraska. I live in Omaha, but I've always loved the outdoors. I go hunting or hiking almost every weekend with my dad or friends. I have two friends who I will call Haley and Todd. I've known them for years, and we would never hike alone because of the risks, so we became a group. Anyways, it was spring break when we went on a week-long backpacking trip. It was a 7-hour drive there, and Haley had her license, so she drove. The first few hours of the drive were fun, but when we got closer to the forest, something felt off. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I just had this terrible feeling. I ignored it and thought that I was just nervous. A few hours later, and the feeling was still there, as we were at the trailhead. We grabbed our packs, and off we went. I felt like I was at home in the trees, and the feeling was soon forgotten. We walked a little over 5 miles that day before we set up camp. We had a 2-person tent that Haley and I had brought, and then a hammock that Todd had brought. After we set up camp, we ate and were just chilling by the fire talking. Todd began complaining about how he didn't want to sleep in his hammock. I didn't want to listen to him complaining and offered to switch places. He gladly accepted. So the night went on like usual until around 2 a.m. when we all got tired and went to bed. Well, everyone but me. I have extremely bad insomnia, so I was just tending to the fire and chilling. Finally, I decided to get into the hammock and read. I put out the fire, grabbed my headlamp, and then got into the hammock. I noticed that something was off, but I couldn't place what it was. That's when it hit me. It was completely silent in the woods. No crickets, no animals, nothing. My skin started to crawl, so I turned off my headlamp and laid down and kept silent. I wanted to try to hear some type of animal to ease my worries. That's when I heard it. Something was dragging against the tent. I wasn't even 5 feet away from the tent. It freaked me out, and I did something really stupid. I called out my friends' names. The noise stopped. I got no answer, but this feeling of dread was something that I hadn't felt before or since. And then something poked into the hammock. It wasn't like a soft poke, it was like a jab. I was horrified and frozen. I also suffered from anxiety, and I felt the panic rising in me. I couldn't understand what was going on. That's when I made another mistake. I decided I wanted to see what had just jabbed me. All this had happened within seconds. I reached up and clicked on my light. What I saw was straight out of a nightmare. There was a creature about 4 feet away from me, staring at me kind of hunched over. I was about 3 feet off the ground in the hammock, so this thing was probably 7 or 8 feet tall. It looked like a dog, but it also didn't. It had the face of a wolf, but human in a way. The eyes looked red, and the ears looked like clipped pit bull ears. Its mouth pulled back in a snarl. I was terrified. Its teeth were huge and sharp. The paws, if you could even call them that, had sharp, long claws that looked like they could tear me apart. I stared at this thing for a few quick seconds before I screamed. As soon as I did that, the creature let out something between a scream and a howl. My friends started yelling and scrambling to open their tent, and that's when the creature and I finally broke eye contact as I heard the commotion behind it. I looked back up, and this thing was climbing a tree. As it was climbing, I saw the back of it, and it had the tail of a dog, grayish-silver fur, a black mane down its back, and a hump. I took this opportunity to scramble out of my hammock. We took off without grabbing anything. I had no shoes even. We made it back to the car, but the whole time back I heard something moving in the trees, like it was keeping tabs on us. The next day we had park rangers go get our things as we were freaked out. When they got there, everything was gone. Not even trash remained. It was as if we had never been there. They blamed us for lying, but we had no idea what had happened. I had no idea what I saw or why it didn't just kill me. I haven't been back in the woods for a very long time, but still every time I close my eyes, I see that thing and hear its roar. For the past 2.5 years, I've been living in the north of the Scottish Highlands. The town I'm in is as far north as you can go, right by the sea. When my dad and his wife told me they'd bought an old house up there, I didn't hesitate. I'd grown up in a dull part of England and always wanted space, hills, and quiet. In my spare time living there, I explored. East of town, past the mouth of the river, there's a ruin of an old castle, and beyond that, a narrow trail that follows the cliffs along the coast. The path dips down at the baseline of the cliffs in places, then climbs back up. On a clear day, it's one of the best walks I've ever done. 6 months after moving, just after Christmas, I'd come out of a long-distance relationship. It had dragged on longer than it should have. Now that it was over, I decided to clear my head with a long hike. I left bright and early at 6 a.m. since it was winter and it would get dark earlier. The weather was cold but dry and the sea was calm. I walked for hours, farther than I'd gone before. By mid-afternoon, I reached what I thought was an abandoned village. Stone houses stood near a loose row near a small bay. There was a round tower at one end, half collapsed. Later I found out that it was part of the Heritage Center, a preserved old port settlement. In winter, it was closed and empty though. I had walked about 10 miles from town so far. Across the bay, further east, I could see larger cliffs in the distance. I was tired, but I told myself that I would cross the bay, reach the cliffs, and then turn back. That was a mistake. The crossing took longer than I expected. The sand was uneven and heavy underfoot. By the time I was about halfway around the bay, the light was fading. The cliffs didn't seem any closer. I checked the time and realized something. I needed to turn back towards town because the tide would come in later. Some sections of the trail down low by the sea would be cut off and submerged if I waited too long. It was fully dark by the time I walked back through the settlement. At night, it didn't feel like a heritage site. I used my phone's light and shined it across the windows of the stone houses as I passed. I don't know why, but I half expected to see someone inside. As I was walking through the town, I heard an engine. A white van rolled into the open area near the houses and stopped. I froze behind one of the boats. 3 young men got out. I would guess they were in their early 20s, wearing hoodies and dark jackets. One of them dragged a metal bin into the open. Another carried something from the van. They started a fire in the bin. I couldn't see what they were burning in the trash can. I had no idea how long they would be there, and I needed to get back before the tide would come in, so I decided to just keep walking and hopefully they wouldn't see me in the darkness. I stepped out from behind the boat and walked without my light on. Unfortunately, they noticed me in the darkness, but didn't call out or say anything. They just stared at me as I walked past them. When I reached the edge of the settlement at the start of the trail, I looked back. 2 of them were still standing around the fire. One wasn't anymore. I told myself that he must be inside the van. I started along the trail at a steady pace. The wind had picked up, and the sea was louder now. After about 5 minutes, I heard footsteps which were not mine. I didn't look back at first because I didn't want to confirm it, but when the path widened slightly, I turned. The figure was about 30 meters behind me. He was on the path coming my way. The next section of the trail dipped down towards the base of the cliffs and into a patch of low trees and scrub. I made the decision and sprinted up ahead to that part of the trail with my light off. Once I got there, instead of staying on the main path, I slipped off it and crouched behind a cluster of rocks near the trees. Footsteps passed on the path above me, and then they stopped. I heard another set of footsteps joining the first. "Where'd he go?" one of them said. "He was right here." One of them slid down the slope, boots scraping on loose stones. I pressed myself flat against the ground, making myself as small as possible. A flashlight beam cut through the dark, sweeping across the rocks. It passed right near me, but I was well concealed. "He's not here," one of them said. "He must have gone ahead." Eventually, I heard them climb back up to the path. Their footsteps moved away, heading farther west towards town. They thought I had kept walking. I didn't move for a long time. My legs had gone numb. When I finally stood, I waited until I couldn't hear anything but the sea. Instead of going back to the main trail straight away, I cut through the low trees and followed the cliff edge at a distance from the path. It was slower and I slipped more than once, but I didn't want to run into them again. It took me hours to get back, and I kept expecting to see the van parked near the entrance to the trail back in town. When I finally reached the road near town, there were no vans. I reported it the next day and the police took my statement. No news ever came of it, but I'm certain they were doing something highly illegal if they felt the need to follow me and look for me. When I was 16, I went on a hike with a girl I had just started dating. There's a large county preserve about 40 minutes from where I grew up in the mountains. I'd been there a handful of times with friends and family, mostly sticking to the main trails. One afternoon, I told her I knew a lookout point that had a clear view over the valley and that we should go see it. We got dropped off near the ranger station. There was a big board with trail maps, safety notices, and a list of closed areas. We stood there for a minute pretending to study it, but I was confident I remembered the way. I led us down what I thought was the right trail that I had always took with my family. The path was wide, and we passed a few other hikers. After about a half an hour, the trail narrowed and split. I picked the left fork without giving it too much thought. The trees got thicker, and we stopped seeing other people. Eventually, we came to a clearing with an old fenced-off structure. It was some kind of utility site. There were 2 tall metal towers with blinking lights, and a small concrete building with peeling paint. Off to the side was what looked like an old fire lookout tower that had collapsed on itself years ago. By then I knew we weren't headed towards the overlook I had in mind. We were still higher than I remembered, and the terrain didn't match. Still, I didn't want to turn back and admit it. There was a dirt service road with fresh tire tracks cutting downhill, so we followed that instead. The road led to a gravel path that curved along the side of the mountain. It kept dropping lower than I expected. After maybe 15 minutes, the trees thinned out and we saw some rooftops below us. At first, I thought that it was a campground or some kind of retreat center, but as we got closer, it didn't look well maintained at all. It was a small town, or at least it used to be. There were rows of houses with broken windows, a grocery store with its sign still hanging, and a gas station with rusted pumps. We saw a garage with old cars inside, and farther down what looked like a skating rink or maybe a small warehouse with faded murals on the outside. We walked down one of the streets. Weeds were growing through the pavement, and a few cars were parked along the curb, covered in dirt and leaves. Some looked like they were from the 1970s or 80s, but there were also a few that didn't seem that old. It didn't make sense as to why the cars would still be there if everybody left the town. It was now late in the afternoon. The sun was starting to dip behind the ridge. She asked me if I knew about this place. I told her I didn't, but I tried to act like it wasn't a big deal. I took a few photos with my phone, mostly wide shots of the empty streets. There wasn't anything dramatic about them, just quiet buildings and cars that hadn't moved in years. We realized that we should probably find a way back before it got dark. Our phones barely had any signals. We tried following what looked like the main road out of town, but it curved towards a drop-off. We ended up on a ridge overlooking a deep ravine. At the bottom, there was a wide clearing with a circle of blackened ground, like people had been lighting fires there recently. Across the ravine, we could see what might have been the entrance road, but there was no easy way to reach it from where we stood. I suggested we try to climb down and cross, but my girlfriend shut that idea down immediately. We kept moving across the ridge until we reached a small brick building covered in graffiti. The door was gone. Inside, it was empty, except for a metal desk and broken glass. We sat on the floor for a few minutes resting in the quiet. I remember hearing the wind through the open doorway. That's when we heard voices. They were coming from somewhere below us. We stepped outside and tried to locate where it was coming from. Down near the clearing of the ravine, we saw a group of men, maybe 5 or 6 of them. They didn't have shirts on, and they were standing in a loose circle. I could tell they were speaking English, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. It echoed strangely off the canyon walls. We didn't wait around to think about approaching the men. We moved in the opposite direction as quietly as we could, then picked up our pace as we were out of sight off the ridge. Neither of us said much. I could tell she was scared, and I was too, but I didn't want to show it. After a while, we found a narrow trail that followed a stream. We stuck to it, knowing that the water would lead somewhere. It took us a long time, at least 2 hours, but eventually the trail opened behind a private golf course. We walked onto the edge of the property, and finally got a good enough signal to call our ride. We waited near the parking lot until her brother picked us up. We didn't talk much on the drive home. Later, I tried to look up information about that town. I searched for old maps and local history forums, but couldn't find anything that matched what we saw. I asked a few people that lived in the area their whole lives. None of them knew what I was talking about. Once when I mentioned it to a friend, I asked my girlfriend to confirm that it actually happened the way I described it. She did, but afterwards she accused me of leading us there on purpose, either trying to intentionally scare her or get lucky with her in that abandoned shed we rested in. We weren't together for much longer after that, and so now I'm the only person I know who has ever seen or heard of that place. I've explored other abandoned places since then, but nothing has felt quite the same. Getting lost in that place with the sun going down and no clear way out is still the most uneasy I've ever felt. It's not somewhere I'd want to end up again, especially in the dark. This happened about 3 years ago. My sister invited the whole family to a wedding in the countryside in southern France. It was held at a vineyard with a stone house and a converted storage shed where they had dinner and dancing. By late evening, I'd had a few glasses of wine. I wasn't wasted, but I was buzzed for sure. Around 9:30 or 10 p.m., my girlfriend at the time said she wanted some air. The music was loud and the room was warm, so I agreed. We slipped out without telling anyone, and walked down the gravel driveway that led from the vineyard to a narrow country road. It was very dark out there with no street lamps. The road we were on had rows of vines on each side and patches of trees on the other. The only light behind us was from the venue, and that faded quickly once we turned onto the road. Up ahead, past the bend in the road, there was a single white light about the height of the treetops. It wasn't moving. My girlfriend asked what it was. I said that it was probably a farmhouse or maybe a tractor parked in a field. I joked about it being a UFO as well. We kept walking, and out of the corner of my eye, I happened to notice movement in the woods to our right. I glanced over and saw two figures moving between the trunks. Both were wearing dark jackets with hoods up. They weren't right on the road, more like a few meters in, but they kept pace with us. I didn't tell my girlfriend straight away to not worry her, but I kept tabs on them without alerting them that I knew they were there, just glancing out of my peripheral vision. The situation sobered me up really quickly, and I decided that we should turn back towards the party. I told her we should head back because the cake cutting was probably about to start. I made sure to mention they would notice we were gone because we were supposed to cut the cake and everyone would be waiting. Neither of us actually had any responsibility at the wedding, but I felt like it was something important to say out loud that we did. When we turned around, the two people in the trees also turned. They stayed parallel to us as we walked back towards the vineyard. There were no cars parked along the road, and the nearest houses were far apart. I don't know where they came from or why they were out there. There was no logical explanation as to why they would be following us either. At one point, my girlfriend squeezed my hand and whispered that there were people in the trees. I said I knew, and I told her to just keep walking normally. At the same time, I made sure to mention again that they were waiting for us to cut the cake and we had to hurry up. Once we were close enough to hear the music clearly, the shapes in the trees stopped and nothing strange happened the rest of the night. Nothing actually happened and they never approached us, but I still think about how isolated that road was and how easily things could have gone differently. I'm sure if we had kept walking there might have been something bad waiting ahead of us or something along those lines. So this story happened around the first COVID lockdown. At the time, I was 17. I'm a guy who likes to hike and explore nature. I live in Australia, so I'm very careful when exploring, as you never know which pile of leaves might hide a snake. During lockdown, I couldn't stand being inside all day, so I took a weekend trip to the Blue Mountains, intending to just spend some time in nature. So I decided to go out and just spend the afternoon in nature. I packed some water, snacks, and a first aid kit. I was following a path I had taken a couple of times before when I heard what sounded like sticks snapping a little off the path up ahead. Figuring that it was just another hiker who had dropped something or saw something interesting just off the path, I kept walking. As I kept going, I got to where I thought the sound had come from, but saw no one. A little creeped out, I continued, but upon checking my watch, I decided to turn back as it would be getting dark soon. Just as I passed that same spot where I had heard the sounds, I noticed something. I hadn't been paying too much attention to it, but all the bird sounds that had kept going my entire hike suddenly stopped. I looked around confused when I heard slow, quiet cracking. Terrified, I took off running. When I finally got back to my car, I quickly got in and locked it. My heart pounding, I started out the way I had come, fully expecting some kind of monster to come charging out after me. But then there was nothing, and the birds started singing again, nearly giving me a heart attack. I quickly started the car and drove off. The next day, I guess feeling the need to be a horror movie character and seek some closure about what had made the sound, I decided to investigate the area again. I parked my car and started to walk to the trail again, this time much earlier in the day. I went back to the same place as the day before and looked around. Upon finding nothing, I decided to keep walking on the trail, looking for any sign of animals that could have made that sound. Besides a few snakes, I found nothing. After nearly an hour of going back and forth, I suddenly got goosebumps. I was at a bend in the trail, but looking at it, I felt a sudden urge to stop. When I did, I felt as though I was being watched. Staring at the bend, it got quiet again, just like the day before. In silence, I felt like I was choking. Then I heard a sound. It was like bones cracking or something gurgling. I was terrified, but felt paralyzed. Only when I heard movement again did I finally snap out of it. Once again, I was running away on the path, but this time I could hear something in the underbrush moving behind me. Deciding to look behind me, all I could see was foliage moving. I finally managed to get to my car, got in, and started the engine before taking off so fast I nearly crashed. I haven't been back to that trail since then.